So welcome to All Things World War II. This is Adam. I wanted to talk about a news story today. So this I heard about on Sunday from a friend in Germany, but it is about Germany lifting the ban on swastikas in video games. So if you didn't know, most game companies had to make specialized versions of their content for German sales. Essentially, that usually boiled down to there being a Balkenkreuz here instead of a swastika and similar stuff. I guess in the new Wolfenstein games, it was some kind of weird triangle thing. So the big part of this is apparently with this game, Wolfenstein 2, the New Colossus. And I haven't played any of these newer Wolfenstein games, not since like the Windows 3.1 version, but after that game came out and they had this kind of, wasn't a scandal, but it was a heavy news story where they were editing Hitler and calling him Heiler and taking off his mustache and all kinds of other silly stuff. Somebody started a campaign and pushed really hard, and apparently it's actually broken through. So there's this one paragraph in this story that I think kind of sums it up. So it says, through the change in the interpretation of the law, games that critically look at current affairs can for the first time be given a age rating. USK Managing Director so-and-so says this long been the case for films with regards to the freedom of the arts is now rightly the case with computer and video games. So this is interesting to me because one, I work in games, and two, I'm a World War II fanatic, and three, I have a very close friend in Germany who deals with this on a pretty frequent basis. So this is right up my alley. So, my opinion has always been that you should never censor anything, but that's kind of a libertarian point of view on the issue. But I'm from the U.S. and we don't do that. So, I have a couple issues with, not issues, I guess. I'm just curious about a few things. So, if film is considered whatever they're calling it, so a film is considered art and therefore you can use it. So if you look at I can't think of the English name, Generation War, there you go. They obviously all wore real uniforms and stuff in that, and Das Boot and all these things. That's fine. And games are much more like film than they certainly used to be. But there's an interesting thought here, which is that this part of the thing says that doesn't necessarily mean all swastikas all the time, but a hard no will no longer be the default. So if you think about Steam, that does mean that this could open the door. Not that I think this should change anything, but this could open the door to people making, indie games that definitely cross a line. But I also think that should be legal and completely fine. So then, it's a good step. It's a very good step. But I don't think it goes far enough because I know that I wanted to bring up a couple other examples. So I know that you had this story earlier in the year. So I'm sure if anybody sees this, they might not be quite as familiar with this story. So Nazi UFO toy pulled for historical inaccuracy. So the scale modeling community kind of groaned very loudly at this one. But to give you a little context, let me just read the beginning of this article. A model of the non-existent Nazi UFO produced by model kit company Revell will no longer be produced after criticism about historical inaccuracy. The model's packaging, which falsely claims the round aircraft was the first object able to fly in space with a top speed of 6,000 kilometers per hour. Nobody thought this was real. Now, I don't like this kind of stuff. We call I don't like any of the occult Nazi stuff, like the crap on the History Channel or any of that garbage, the Hunting Hitler garbage. Nazi mega weapons does have some redeeming qualities as they go to cool places, but there's also a lot of garbage there. And I don't care about this. I don't care. If there's some truth, I've actually never seen anything that even lead me to believe this was at all true, or that they were even trying to develop it. Obviously it wasn't true. So, it's just a stupid thing. So, I never understood why anybody would think it was real. If you buy a Star Trek model kit, it's not going to, if it says the USS Enterprise was commissioned in the 23rd century, blah, blah, blah. You don't take it off the shelf for being inaccurate. It's a UFO, which, by the way, has Balkenkreuz and not swastikas on it. So it's just ridiculous that they had to stop selling it. It's ridiculous that they stopped making it. The whole thing was nuts. And this was in June of this year. So 2 months after this, they lift the ban on video game stuff. Now, more people play video games than build Revell model kits, trust me. So, and this is the big one because you're still not allowed to have swastikas in World War II aircraft kits in Germany, and that's just historical display pieces. Video games are games and models are models. So if you legalize swastikas in games, you should legalize swastikas in model kits. And then there's another issue. So I just have these generic pictures of. I couldn't find any pictures of reenactors in Germany because, well, when you type in Germany reenactors, you just get reenactors in German uniforms. But they're not allowed to have swastikas on their jackets, right? When they reenact in Germany, you can do it in all the countries around there. My friend told me this. And so, Italy or Austria or, Holland, any of these places, Millitrax is right to, above Germany, and that's fine. But no, just not in Germany. So that's historical. I don't know how you categorize that. Historical display. I mean, in the U.S. we have, they do kind of their private milsim stuff. And then they also do, where they just display to the public and talk about stuff. So why would that not be allowed? Technically, these should be more allowed, models and reenactors, than video games. It's if art is the line you're taking, okay. But if historical context is the line you're taking, then models and reenactors should be the same thing. It's a very strange situation. So I also, while researching this a little bit, ran into the fact that Call of Duty World War II apparently only had the proper German flags in the campaign, but not in the multiplayer. Now, that's something I've run into a ton. When we play Company of Heroes, there's no swastikas, but there should also not really be a lot of swastikas on vehicles anyway. Only aircraft really did that. U-boats had the flags that would be on in rare occasions. Tanks usually didn't unless it was a aircraft recognition flag. But in general, that's how they mark it. They mark us, the U.S., with like a star, and they mark the Germans with essentially like a Balkenkreuz is usually what they use. Sometimes inside the red square and sometimes not. So I didn't know that COD had done that. So I ran into this interview with a guy from Sledgehammer, which was the Activision studio that was in charge of it, I guess. And I found it, this little quote he says, interesting, so I wanted to play this.
Ultimately, we decided that, Nazi symbols like the swastika had a place in our campaign to be historically accurate. You see that in film and TV. Mm-hmm. So. But, our multiplayer in zombies, this is a global community. This is a global community where the experience is visceral and intense. We didn't feel like it was appropriate there. I mean, it's a dark symbol, and we have to be really respectful and mindful of, the customs regulations of different territories, and we wanted the whole community to be able to play together. So
I think that my opinion on this is slightly different, and that's if you're going to mess with World War II, and this is the same opinion I had about the Overlord trailer I reviewed, if you're going to mess with World War II, don't half-ass it. Like, either do it or don't do it. And, I actually bought this game, and I didn't really play it very much, and I think I'm honestly too close to the subject matter now. I've been studying the war for a number of years, and it's kind of ruined games for me. It was really, it just felt like Modern Warfare in a World War II suit. Vehicles were overscale, and that's what I start doing as an armor guy. I start walking around, and I'm like, well, that's 2 times bigger than it should be, and blah, 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 whatever. But I didn't know they did that, and I think that if you don't just want to do it, then why bother doing it? Because it really did seem like they weren't 100% involved in or dedicated to making it like it, realistic. It felt very Hollywood. It felt very whatever, and it was a little strange. It didn't really feel quite right to me. And if you're going to mess with World War II, just do it. And if that, you should have those discussions, internally or externally when they are initially being formed. Like, will it be okay in 8-on-8 multiplayer if guys with swastikas on their jackets are shooting people? Because now we have the resolution in our textures to show that. I can't answer that question. I think that if I was in charge of an experience of a game, I would want it to feel as realistic as I could. That's how I've always been. But I'm also a huge proponent of the idea that just because a guy was wearing his national uniform does not mean that he's politically aligned to the party that was in charge of his country, nor does it mean he was guilty of a war crime. So I think that, and this is, by the way, this Call of Duty thing isn't just Germany. This was internationally. So they essentially said campaign, yes, and I'm sure they had to edit that for Germany. And then multiplayer everywhere, no. And I get it. I don't think that that's what I would do, but I totally get that that's the safe way to do it. As I said, in Company Heroes, they do that. There was a line of toys called, what was it, like Forces of Valor. These are 1/32 scale, big toys. They even had them at like Walmart's for a while, and they all had Balkenkreuz instead of swastikas. Like on the tail of a Stuka, they'd have essentially like a thin Balkenkreuz X, you know, on a 45. So if you wanted it to look correct, you'd have to paint the rest of it in there. It's pretty common. I mean, it's because it's a kid's toy, and they're like, well, we don't want to put swastikas on kids' toys. But for me, in general, I think that the context and the lessons of the war. By the way, this guy here, he said 100 million people died in World War II. That's almost double the average agreed upon figure of how many people died. It's closer to 60, most people say. But I thought that was interesting. But so I think that you should be responsible for teaching your kids about it, or people that you know, you can't kind of. I worry that if you try to censor and kid glove a really big situation in world history, you're going to mess up the message more than you're going to protect people from the scary parts of it. Because that kind of seems like what people want to do. They're like, World War II is really cool. But you want to cut out like the political motivations for part of it by censoring the imagery that was on the uniforms. And I think that you just start to dilute it. Now, believe me, Activision did a way better job than what Battlefield 5 is doing, where that's just so diluted it's not even the war anymore. God knows what that thing is. But as far as the swastika stuff, I don't actually have a problem with what Activision did. As far as like just kind of neutering it for multiplayer, because multiplayer, it's not like you actually feel like you're fighting the German army. You're just fighting 8 other guys in God knows where in a map. So it's fine. It's par for the course, let's say. But as far as what Germany's doing, I think what they should do is reevaluate the base law that caused them to be banned in games in the first place, and that should fix the reenacting situation, and it should fix the model kit thing. Because the model kit thing, I know that industry is not terribly big. It is where I come from before doing this channel on YouTube. And, you know, German guys really can't even show their stuff in their own country. Like if you try to take a model of a Stuka, you know, to certain model shows, you won't be allowed to show it because they had swastikas on the tail. So I don't really have a lot to question here. I'm glad that the step is being made, but they need to go farther. And people need to understand that when you hide something, you make it alluring. When you keep it away from kids, they're going to want to know why you're keeping it away from them. If you put it in their face, they'll get bored with it and not care. Trust me. If you were in Germany and you were like, this is Grandpa's jacket and this is what he blah 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 with, they'd be as glossed over as most young kids are in the U.S. when their grandparents, you know, were talking about their time in the U.S. Army. But if you make it like a secret thing, I think that adds levels that aren't necessarily helpful to what you're trying to do. Because you're like, why can't we talk about it? So let's just hope this keeps going. It's a positive step. I just wanted to draw some attention to it.